"One day you'll forget me," I told my ex-wife, standing in the mud beside her loaded wagon, and I said it kindly, like a mercy, like a gift. But Cora didn't nod, and she didn't leave easy. She turned, tears cutting clean lines down a face I'd loved for 9 years, and she said the 7 words that have haunted every winter since. "That's the one thing I can't do." I'm Samuel Reyes, and I was a Montana rancher who once had everything. A wife with a laugh like spring water, a little girl with my stubborn chin, 300 head, and a valley under the bitterroots that felt like God's own promise. But the fever came. The winter our creek froze too hard to dig, and grief split my ex-wife and me the way a dropped axe splits a log, clean, and along a line neither of us ever chose. So I told her she'd forget me. I told her it would be a mercy. But here's what I didn't know standing in that mud. I'd spend 6 long years writing her 41 letters I never had the courage to mail. And one dying man's last request was about to drive us both back down the same road. Why does a man tell the only woman he ever loved to forget him? What was I really hiding in that cigar box in the barn? And why, after 6 years apart, was she still refusing every good man who knelt to ask? And when we finally stood face to face again, which one of us broke first? Let me take you back. The wagon wheels turned. I watched them turn. I stood there with my hands hanging useless at my sides, and I did not run after her. A man tells himself all kinds of things to keep his feet still. I told myself she'd be happier somewhere the air didn't smell like our girl's medicine. I told myself the valley would only ever be a grave to her now. I told myself I was strong. But the truth is, I was a coward in a strong man's body, and I let the only good thing I had left roll away down that road, until she was a small dark shape against the yellow grass, and then she was nothing at all. The house was quiet when I went back inside. Too quiet. You don't know how loud quiet can be until you've heard a house that used to have a child in it. There was a little bed in the corner room. I had built it myself, sanded every edge smooth, so Ellie wouldn't get a splinter. It was still made, the blanket still turned down. For 6 years, I could not bring myself to touch that blanket, and I could not bring myself to burn that bed, so it just sat there in the dark, like a question nobody would answer. Let me tell you about the winter it all broke. Ellie was 4. She had my chin. Stubborn, everybody said so. And she had Cora's laugh, this bright bubbling thing that came up out of her like water out of the ground. And when she laughed, you couldn't help but laugh too, even if your back ached, and the cattle were sick, and the money was thin. She'd follow me out to the barn in boots too big for her, stomping through the snow, and she'd name every horse a new name every day. "That one's Pancake," she'd say, and the next day, "That one's General." I never corrected her. I'd have let her rename the whole world. Then the fever came. It came the way trouble always comes on a ranch. Quiet, at night, when you can't do anything about it. She woke burning. Cora had her wrapped in cool cloths by the stove before I'd even got my boots on. We did everything. God knows we did everything. But the doctor was 2 days' ride in good weather, and this was not good weather. The creek froze so hard that winter you could have driven a wagon across it. The wind came down off the bitterroots like it had a grudge. I rode for the doctor anyway. I want you to know that. I rode into a wall of white, with my face going numb, and my horse screaming at me to turn back. And I made it halfway before the drifts stopped us cold, and I had to turn around or die out there and be no use to anybody. I came back with nothing. I came back with ice in my beard and empty hands, and I saw Cora's face in the window. And I knew before I got off the horse. Ellie died just before dawn. In her mother's arms by the stove, with the wind howling outside like it was grieving too. And here's the thing nobody tells you about losing a child. It doesn't just take the child. It reaches into your marriage and it starts pulling out everything else, one thread at a time, until the whole cloth comes apart in your hands. Cora stopped sleeping. She'd sit up in that little room at night, holding Ellie's wooden horse, the one I'd whittled by lamplight the fall before, turning it over and over in her fingers. And me? I did the thing men like me do. I went outside, I worked, I split rails until my hands bled and the blood froze to the wood, because out there in the cold, I didn't have to feel anything but cold. and cold I could stand, feeling I could not. We stopped talking. Not in a fight. That would have been easier. We just went silent, the two of us, in a house that had gone silent. And the silence grew and grew until there wasn't room in it for both of us anymore. One morning she said, real quiet, "I can't breathe in here, Samuel." And instead of holding her, instead of saying, "I can't breathe either, let's not breathe alone," I said nothing. I just nodded and went to the barn. Because I was a coward. I keep coming back to that word, because it's the true one. She started packing that afternoon. I could have stopped her with one sentence. One. Stay. Please stay. You're all I've got left, and if you go, this house will kill me slow. That sentence was sitting right there in my chest the whole time, hot as a coal. But a coward doesn't say the true thing. A coward says the noble-sounding thing that lets him off the hook. So I helped her load the wagon. Can you believe that? I carried her trunk out with my own 2 hands and set it in the bed of the wagon like a gentleman. Like helping her leave was the last kind thing I could do for her. And when it was done and she climbed up onto the seat, I stood there in the mud and I looked up at her and I said it. One day you'll forget me, Cora. That'll be a mercy for both of us. I thought, God help me. I actually thought I was giving her permission to be happy. I thought I was cutting the rope so she could float free of all this drowning. I said it kindly. That's the part I'll never wash out of my hands. I said the cruelest thing I ever said, and I said it gently, with love, like I was doing her a favor. She went still, the reins slack in her hands, and she looked down at me with the tears already coming, cutting clean lines through the trail dust on her face. And she said, "That's the one thing I can't do." Then she snapped the reins, and the wheels turned, and I stood in the mud and let her go. 6 years. You want to know what 6 years of that does to a man? Let me show you, because I lived every day of it. I got up before the sun. I ran the ranch. I built fence I did not need, miles of it. Good tight fence around pastures that held nothing. Because a man's hands have to be doing something, or his mind starts doing the thing you can't let it do. The neighbors thought I was industrious. Old Amos, Cora's own father, used to ride by and shake his head and say, "Samuel, you got more fence than the government." I'd just tip my hat. I couldn't tell him the truth. The truth was, every post I sank was a word I couldn't say to his daughter. And then there were the letters. It started one winter night, maybe a year after she left. The wind was up and the house was cold and I couldn't sleep. And I found myself at the table with a stub of pencil and a scrap of paper, and before I knew it I was writing, "Dear Cora." 2 words, and my hand was shaking. I told her about the calf that got stuck in the mud and how I thought of her the whole time I was pulling it out, because she was always better with the scared ones. I told her the foxgloves came up purple by the barn and I didn't have the heart to cut them. I told her I was sorry. I told her I lied. I told her the mercy I offered her was really just my own cowardice wearing its Sunday clothes. And when I was done, I folded that letter up neat, and I put it in a cigar box in the barn. Because a coward writes, but a coward does not mail. I did it again the next winter, and the next. 41 letters over 6 years, every one of them starting "Dear Cora," every one of them the truest thing I had in me. And not a single one of them ever left that barn. They just sat there in the dark in a cigar box that used to hold my father's tobacco. 41 pieces of my heart I was too afraid to put in an envelope. I'd go out sometimes just to look at the box. I never opened it. I just needed to know it was there. It was the closest thing I had to her. I thought that was how I'd die. Alone in that valley, with a barn full of fence and a box full of letters. An old man who'd let his whole life roll away down a muddy road because he couldn't say 4 true words. And then, on a gray morning in late September, with the first snow already dusting the top of the bitterroots, a rider came up my road. I hadn't had a visitor in months. I set down the coffee I was drinking on the porch rail and I watched him come. And something in the way he rode, hard, urgent, no wasted motion, put a cold hand on the back of my neck before he ever reached me. He was a young hand I half recognized from Amos's outfit 2 towns over. His horse was lathered. He'd ridden through the night, you could see it. "Mr. Reyes," he said, breathing hard. "That's me." He pulled a folded note out of his coat. and his hand was shaking, and I didn't know yet if it was from cold or from the news. "It's Amos, sir. Old Amos. He's dying." The word hit me in the chest. Amos was the closest thing to a father I had left in this world. When my own folks passed, that stubborn old man taught me to read a sky, and doctor a sick cow, and stand up straight when life tried to bend me. And he never once in all 6 years blamed me for his daughter leaving. He should have. He never did. "There's 300 head still up on his high pasture," the boy went on. "And the snow's coming early and hard, and there's nobody can bring 'em down in time. He's asking for you." The boy swallowed. He said, "Tell Samuel it's got to be him. Only him. Nobody else." I took the note with fingers gone numb. I unfolded it. It was Amos's handwriting, but shaky, wandering off the line. An old man's hand fighting to get the words out before his time ran out. 3 words. Just 3. "She's here, son." The world went very quiet, the way it does before something big. My coffee steamed on the porch rail. The snow sat white and waiting on the mountains. Somewhere behind me in the barn, 41 letters sat in the dark. "She's here." Cora. Cora was back. Cora was 2 towns over at her dying father's side, and the old man, the sly, loving, stubborn old man, was using his last breath to pull the 2 of us back into the same room. I should tell you my heart leapt. But that would only be half of it, because the other half of me, the coward half, the half that had let her roll away down that road, that half was so scared I could hardly breathe. 6 years. What do you say to a woman after 6 years and 41 letters she never got? What do you say to the woman you told to forget you? I stood there frozen on my own porch, with the note shaking in my hand. And then I did the first brave thing I'd done in 6 years. I set down the note. I walked to the barn, and I saddled my horse. But before I mounted up, and I don't fully know why I did this, except that something in me knew I couldn't go without it, I climbed up into the loft, and I pulled that cigar box out from under the loose board where I'd kept it hidden all these years. It was heavier than I remembered. 41 letters is a lot of a man's heart to hold in 2 hands. I stood there in the dusty light of the barn, snow starting to sift down past the open loft door, and I looked at that box for a long moment. Every coward instinct in me said, "Leave it. Ride to Amos. Do the work. Be useful. Keep your mouth shut. Keep your feet still. Keep the true thing locked in your chest where it's safe." But Amos was dying, and Ellie was gone. And I was 44 years old, with more fence than the government and nothing, to show for 6 years of my life, but a box full of letters I was too scared to send. I thought about what I'd told her in the mud. "One day you'll forget me." And I thought about what she said back. "That's the one thing I can't do." What if she hadn't? In 6 long years, what if she hadn't forgotten me either? I tucked that cigar box into my saddlebag. My hands were steady now. First time in a long time. Then I swung up into the saddle, turned my horse toward the road she'd rolled away down 6 years before, and I rode hard into the falling snow, toward a dying man's last wish, toward 300 head on a freezing mountain, and toward the woman I'd spent 6 years writing to and never once mailed. I didn't know what I'd find when I got there. I didn't know if she'd even look at me. I didn't know there was another man who'd been coming around on Sundays, kneeling to ask her the question I'd been too much a coward to ask her to stay for. I only knew the snow was coming. My heart was pounding like a green colt against a gate, and after 6 years of silence, I was finally riding the wrong way down that muddy road, which was the only right way left. The town of Halford came up out of the snow, slow, like something in a dream you're not sure you want to reach. I hadn't been down this road in 6 years. My horse knew it was strange too, kept flicking his ears, kept slowing, like even he remembered the last time we came this way we came back alone. The snow was falling steady now, fat wet flakes that stuck to my coat and melted cold against my neck. My heart was going so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Amos's place sat at the edge of town, a low log house with smoke curling weak from the chimney. There was a wagon out front, a doctor's buggy, and on the porch a shape I'd have known in the pitch dark from 100 miles off. Cora. She was standing at the rail with a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, looking out at the snow, and she went still the second she saw the rider coming. I watched her recognize me the way you watch weather change on a mountain. Slow, then all at once. Her hand came up to her mouth. She didn't wave, she didn't run, she just stood there, and I rode the last 100 yards, feeling every single one of them. I got down off my horse. My legs didn't want to hold me. 6 years older. Gray at her temples now, fine as frost. Thread on her sleeve from her sewing. And her eyes? Lord, her eyes were the same. That deep, steady brown that used to be able to read me like a Sunday paper. Samuel, she said. Just my name. But her voice broke a little on the end of it, and that little break told me 6 years of things all at once. Cora. That was all we could manage. 2 names in the snow. Everything else, the mud, the wagon, the letters, the girl we buried, all of it stood there between us, too big to fit into words. Then, from inside the house, a voice like gravel in a bucket called out, "That better be Samuel Reyes out there, or I'm gonna be real disappointed to die." And despite everything, despite all of it, Cora and I both almost smiled. Amos was propped up in his bed with about 6 quilts on him and a face like old leather left in the sun. But his eyes were sharp, right to the end. That man's eyes were sharp. He looked at me standing in his doorway, with snow melting off my hat, and he said, "Took you long enough. Both ways, I mean." And he cut his eyes over at his daughter when he said it, and I understood exactly what the old fox was doing, even now, even dying. 300 head, Samuel, he said, and the effort of it made him cough, a deep wet cough that scared me. Up on the high pasture, snow's early. If they don't come down in the next 2 weeks, they'll be lost up there, buried, and this ranch dies with me. He grabbed my wrist. His grip was still strong. You're the only one I trust to bring him down. You and her, like the old days. Papa, Cora said softly. Don't tell a dying man don't, Amos said. I've earned the right to meddle. And he looked at the 2 of us, one and then the other, and something soft came into his hard old face. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I'm just asking you to bring my cattle home. Whatever else happens up on that mountain. He shrugged one shoulder. Well, that's between you and the snow. So that's how it started. We rode out the next morning before light. The 2 of us, up toward the high pasture. And it was the strangest thing, because our hands remembered how to do this, even when our hearts didn't know what to say. She rode drag in her father's old coat. I took point, and we moved those cattle the way we'd moved cattle 100 times before we lost everything. We didn't talk about the mud. We didn't talk about the wagon. We talked about heifers and weather, and which draw to push them through. And it was safe, and it was familiar, and it was almost, like it used to be. On the 3rd day, a heifer bolted at the creek crossing and near put me in the water, and I hauled back so hard I nearly went off the other side of my horse, arms windmilling like a fool, and Cora laughed. She laughed. And it was Ellie's laugh. That bright bubbling thing that came up out of her like water out of the ground. I hadn't heard it in 6 years, and it went through me like the first warm day of spring goes through ground that's been frozen so long it forgot what soft felt like. I had to turn my horse away so she wouldn't see my face. That was the night I found out about Nathan Boone. We'd made camp under a stand of pines, small fire going, coffee on, and a rider came up out of the dark. A big, steady man, good coat, kind face, the kind of man mothers pray their daughters find. He tipped his hat to me polite enough, but the way his eyes went straight to Cora told me everything before he said a word. Cora, he said, heard your father took a turn, rode up to see if you needed anything. That's kind of you, Nathan, she said. This is Samuel. He's helping bring the herd down. Nathan Boone looked at me. I looked at Nathan Boone, and in the way that men do, without one rude word passing between us, we understood each other completely. He knew who I was, and I knew what he wanted. He didn't stay long, but before he rode off, he turned in his saddle and said, gentle, not unkind, Cora, the offer stands. It'll always stand. And then he was gone into the dark. The fire popped. The snow sifted down through the pines. He's asked me to marry him, Cora said quietly, staring into the flames. Twice. He's a good man, Samuel. Steady. Kind. Never raised his voice in his life. She was quiet a long moment. I keep telling him no, and I can't rightly explain to him why. I didn't say anything. My heart was slamming against my ribs. Ask her, the brave part of me said. Ask her why. You know why. Ask. But the coward in me was still there. 6 years older and not one bit braver, and I let the moment pass. I just poked the fire and said, "He seems like a good man." "He is," she said. And then she looked up at me across the fire. And there was something in her eyes that was almost angry, almost pleading. That's the trouble. And she rolled over in her blankets and said no more. We buried Amos on a Thursday. He'd hung on just long enough for us to bring the last of the herd down into the low pasture, like he'd been waiting for it, like he wouldn't let go till his cattle were home. Cora was holding his hand when he went. He looked at her, and he looked at me, standing in the doorway, and the last thing that stubborn old man ever did on this earth was smile. Then he closed his eyes, and the room went quiet. We buried him next to Cora's mother, under a bare cottonwood with the snow coming down. There weren't many folks. Nathan Boone came, stood in the back, hat in his hands. When it was done, he pressed my shoulder as he passed, one man to another, and left without a word. A decent man to the last. I've never forgotten that. And then it was just the two of us, in that quiet log house, sorting through the things a life leaves behind. That's when she opened the trunk. It was in the corner of the back room, an old cedar trunk with a broken latch. Cora knelt in front of it and lifted the lid, and I heard her breath catch, and I came over, and then my own breath stopped in my chest. Dresses. Tiny dresses, a little blue one with a torn hem, a bonnet no bigger than my 2 hands, a pair of boots too big for a 4-year-old who liked to stomp through the snow, naming horses, and a wooden horse, the one I'd whittled by lamplight the fall before the fever took her. Ellie's things, all of them. Every single thing our daughter had ever worn or held, carried out of that valley 6 years ago in a wagon. Carried from town to town, room to room, packed and unpacked a dozen times over 6 long years, and kept. All of it kept. Cora had her back to me. Her shoulders were shaking. "You said I'd forget her," she whispered. She wasn't looking at me. She had the little wooden horse in her hands, turning it over and over the way she used to on those long, sleepless nights. "You said I'd forget you." "Cora, I have tried." Her voice cracked wide open. "God is my witness, Samuel. I have tried so hard to be that mercy you wanted for me. 6 years I've tried. A good man on his knees asking me to be his wife. And I couldn't. Because—" She turned around, and her face was wet and ruined and beautiful, and she said it. "Because I never forgot you. Not one single day. It's the one thing I cannot do. I told you that in the mud, and it's still true, and I hate that it's true, and I don't know how to stop." And something in me broke. 6 years of fence and silence and letters in the dark. All of it broke at once. I crossed that room, and I got down on my knees in front of her. The way I never once let myself kneel at our daughter's grave, because kneeling meant feeling, and feeling was the thing I couldn't stand. And I took her hands, wooden horse and all, and I held on like a drowning man. "There's a box in my barn," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. "A cigar box. My father's old one. There's 41 letters in it." She went still. "I wrote you every winter. 6 years of winters. I'd sit at that table when I couldn't sleep, and I'd write Dear Cora, and I'd tell you everything. About the calves, about the foxgloves, about how sorry I was, about how I lied to you in the mud. The tears were coming now, and I let them. First time in 6 years I just let them come. And every letter, I folded it up, and I put it in that box, and I never mailed a single one. Because I was a coward, Cora. I was a coward the day you left, and I've been a coward every day since. I told you you'd forget me, because I was too scared to get down on my knees like this and beg you to stay." I reached into my coat. I'd carried them up the mountain and back. I pulled out the cigar box and set it on the floor between us, and I opened the lid, and there they were. 41 folded letters. 6 years of a heart too scared to send itself. "I didn't forget you either," I said. "I never even came close. Every board I sanded on Ellie's bed, Every foxglove that came up purple, every winter that creek froze, you were there. You were always there. I pressed her hands to my chest so she could feel my heart going. The mercy wasn't real. The only true thing I ever had was you and her. And I let one roll away down a road, and I couldn't save the other. And I have hated myself for 6 years for both. She was crying so hard she couldn't speak. And then she leaned forward, and she pressed her forehead to mine, the way she used to, back when we were whole. And we knelt there on the floor of her father's house with our daughter's wooden horse between us, and 41 letters spread around our knees, and we cried. We cried together. For the first time in 6 years, we grieved our girl together, instead of each alone in our separate silence. And I tell you, there is a difference between crying alone and crying with someone who loved what you loved. One is drowning, the other is finally coming up for air. "Read me one," she said finally, her voice raw. "One of the 41. So I picked one up off the floor. But I didn't need to unfold it. I'd written it so many times, in so many versions, over so many cold nights, that I knew it by heart. "Dear Cora," I said, looking right at her, "I am no good without you. I have known it every single day, and if I ever get the chance to tell you to your face, I will not waste it being a coward. I will ask you to come home, because you are my home, and you always were, and the valley is just a valley without you in it." She made a sound, half a sob, half a laugh, Ellie's laugh trying to come up through all that grief, and she grabbed my face in both her hands, and she kissed me. 6 years of winter, gone. Just like that. We drove the last of the herd down together through the falling snow, and at the top of the pass she reined up and looked back at Halford, then ahead at the valley road, our road, and she took my hand, and we rode down it together. We married again in the spring, under the cottonwood, up on the hill, right beside the little grave, with the foxgloves coming up purple around it, so that Ellie could be there for it too. It felt right that way. Like the three of us were finally, all together, in the only way we still could be. Nathan Boone came to the wedding, shook my hand after, real firm, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "You take care of her." And I said I would. And I have. We never had another child. That's the truth, and I won't dress it up. Some things break and don't grow back the same. But every June, that whole hillside comes up purple with foxgloves. Dozens of them now. Hundreds, because Cora plants more every spring. And she kneels up there in the dirt talking soft to our girl while she works, telling her about the calves, about the weather, about her stubborn old father who finally learned to say the true thing. And the house that stood empty and silent for 6 long years. The house with the little bed I couldn't burn. That house is never quiet anymore. It's full of her sewing, and my boots by the door, and coffee on the stove, and some nights, the sound of her laugh. Ellie's laugh, coming up out of her mother like water out of the ground. I told my ex-wife she'd forget me one day. I said it like it was a mercy. I was wrong about nearly everything a man can be wrong about. But she was right. It was the one thing she couldn't do. And it turned out that wasn't a curse we had to carry. It was the vow we should have said the first time. So let me ask you something. Before you go, if you've read this far, this one's for you. Is there someone you once loved? Someone you let roll away down a road because you were too scared, or too proud, or too broken to say the one true thing sitting hot in your chest? A letter you wrote in your heart 100 times and never once sent? Because here's what a coward in a strong man's body learned too late, and what I'd give anything to have known sooner. The people who matter don't want the mercy of your silence. They want the truth of your voice, while there's still time to hear it. So who is it for you? And what's stopping you from riding the wrong way down that road tonight? Which just might be the only right way left. Tell me in the comments. Somebody out there needs to read what you're too scared to say.